Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Excuse me. Basically looking at 5 images and going through 5 different processes in Capture One. If this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. As usual, we have 60 minutes today. We'll probably use up all of that, I would think. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. The way you do that, if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, if you're on your Mac or PC, you'll see the last box is labeled questions. So just put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. If you are on your iOS device or Android device, tap the question mark icon and equally that will come straight through to me as well. I am recording the session too, so you can watch it again tomorrow, I would think, on our YouTube channel. And details of that will come up in a follow-up email for you in roughly 1 to 24 hours time, depending on the speed of GoToWebinar system. So let us begin. So let's just switch over to Capture One. You should be able to see Capture One on screen now, and to help you find the cursor, it's just potentially going to be highlighted like this from time to time as well. So what I've done is try to pick out a few different images, as you can see here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. Some you can see what I was playing around with yesterday, others you cannot. So I've tried to pick sort of 5 various different ones that use different treatments and processes and so on and so forth. If these images don't necessarily relate to you, don't worry. You know, it's more about the technique, and with all the various different things that we do, I'm sure you'll be able to pick something up. Okay, so let's start with an easy one. This is, let's just hide our browser, Command B. This is, let me just check if I hit reset up here so we can get it straight out of camera. So just a pretty basic headshot, and actually not bad out of camera at all, but we can certainly make some improvements. And I think that's, you know, a good lesson to go by. Even if something is looking pretty good out of camera, there's just a couple of things that we can do to help improve this. For example, like I find a couple of things in the background distracting. It's my daughter, so there's food on her face, of course, and we've got a mark here and a few other bits as well. So we can certainly make some improvements. Now, as usual, before doing anything else, it makes sense to just check on the exposure and white balance. There's no point going into anything else until you're happy with exposure and happy with white balance. Exposure's almost okay, but if we look at our levels and histogram, I think the first thing I would do is just lift this a little bit. It was a nice sunny day, so it makes sense to have it as bright as possible. If we just click on exposure, we can see before and after. So it just brightens it up nicely overall. If I'm worried about losing the highlights here, then we can just pull this back a little bit with the highlight slider, like so. So that's just a good base exposure correction as well. White balance, I think I'll probably leave it as shot. It's probably on the warm side. If we cool down, kind of personal preference really, I think I'll probably go as shot, to be honest. If anything, I might potentially cool down a bit, but let's go with that. You can use your cursor keys in the box, of course, so if we just want to use our cursor keys to nudge it up and down a little bit, we can do as well. So again, I'll stick with that. Sometimes, like cropping, sometimes I leave it to the end, but I think if it's hard to visualize the image, then it's nice to kind of get cropping out of the way earlier on. Also to help visualize, as I noticed it's not turned on, quite often I have this view on, which is proof margin, so that just gives me a bit more space around the image. And all the metadata stuff down here I tend to find distracting. So if we hide viewer labels, then that just gives us a bit of a nicer, cleaner interface as such. So hit C for crop on the keyboard, like so. Should be able to hit C for crop. Let's just check what keyboard shortcuts I'm on. Probably Y. Wrong set of keyboard shortcuts. So let's just improve on the crop a little bit as well, like so. So we could leave it there, but as I said, I find there's a couple of bits in the background that is a little bit distracting. So we've got the window frame here, we got this kind of bright light sort of wall over here. So if I hit C to get my crop back, let's actually just crop out that kind of highlight on the left hand side, which is much better. But as I said, I found the framing, so like the window frame here, is a little bit distracting. So a couple of things we can do. Let's just throw in a vignette, which will help that. And also, if we just go to the color editor in our color tool tab here, let's just move this up a bit higher so it's easier for you guys to see. Straight to the advanced tab. And if you haven't used the color editor before, very simple. You shouldn't be afraid of it. Now I know it looks a bit daunting at first because, you know, everything's grayed out, nothing's active. What do I do? So step one, grab your color picker, and I'm just going to pick on, it's kind of a blue gray, I'm guessing, ever so slightly around here. And if I just then drop saturation down, then that just kills that color off. So if we want to see before and after, if I option click on my reset button here, so if we do an option click, see before and after. So it just knocks all the saturation out of that. I think that's much less distracting. Tarek says, am I using the new MacBook Pro? That could be the issue. Yes, it is a new MacBook Pro, but I've never seen that before. So that's really strange. So a dead keyboard, but there we go. One of those things. Otherwise, the MacBook Pro's been working great, I should say. So that's really the only hiccup I've had. Okay, so let's zoom in and do a bit of cleanup. Let's grab pen tool, do a bit of cleanup. Easy to do, really, just with the spot tool. So in our details tool tab, let's just grab spot removal, and we've got two kinds of spot removal here, dust and spot. Different mathematic algorithm. So dust is physical dust on the sensor. Spot is a spot on the image itself. So let's grab our spot cursor tool, which is either here or here, and then if we want to adjust the size, we can drag our radius slider down here, or once we've placed the spot, we can just pick up a corner like so. So you want to really aim for having as small a sort of circle as possible around the spot itself, like so. And if you want to adjust any, you can just drag it, make it bigger and smaller, like so. So I'll just get rid of some of those distracting stuff. I thought there was one here, but that's dirt on my monitor, so we won't take that one off. This one might be a bit trickier because it's on an edge. Let's see if that handles it okay. If I press V on my keyboard, there we go. We'd never notice that if we zoom out to fit, then that does a good job of that. Let's take out just a couple more, make that smaller, smaller, and that's pretty good. Now this, whatever on earth that is, we can't really handle that with the spotting tool. So what we could do instead is just simply do a basic bit of healing. So grab a patch from here and then heal over to there, which we do with a local adjustment. So if we go up to our local adjustments tab, let's click and hold on the plus, because that gives us the option for layer, clone or heal. Clone, just like Photoshop, a straight copy for copy. Heal will match the luminosity at the target, so it blends in better. So let's say new heal layer, and we just call this dirt or whatever on earth it is. Take our local adjustments brush. So we're going to draw a mask. Now that brush is way too big, so let's right click to make it smaller. And I want to pick a source, so much like Photoshop, option click to pick our source. So I want to grab some stuff from around here. Let's guess at that. And then let's just draw our mask in over there. And then once our mask is hidden, that does a pretty good job of hiding that. If we turn that on and off, you can see the before and after like so. Simple stuff. And if we want to see the before and after of the spot removal, let's just option click. So that's before and after as well. So it does a pretty good job of getting rid of all those tiny bits. Let's do a couple more like so. Quick question from, was it Tim? Tim, what does changing the pie slice in the color wheel do? Good question, Tim. Well, basically that's your selected color range. So if we say view selected color range down here, then basically everything will go to monochrome that's selected. So if I just grab this and just drag this all the way around here, so you see now we've got a much broader color selection, so that's dipped to monochrome. So really the idea of the pie slice is that you can change your color range. Now in this case, I was pretty sure there was no other blue-gray in the shot that was going to be affected, so I just didn't even bother looking with that. But it's good practice to just check view selected color range to make sure it's not affecting anything else. Good question from Addy about the spots. The answer is no. Addy's question was, is there a trick to removing spots on edges? It's always a bit more complex. Excuse me, like this one hang on, option, whoops, let's see. I just managed to remove all. Let's do undo. Okay, so option click reset. So we've got that spot sort of on an edge. They're always more tricky to remove. If I was being super critical, I'd probably just heal it like we did over here. But if it's a really nasty one on an edge, then it's probably just a trip to round trip to Photoshop, I would think. And yes, Alan, I'm at 100% Pasty when using the heal adjustment. You don't have to be, but I find when healing, Capture One does a good job of matching luminosity at the target area, so I don't really find I have to mess about with that much. So, heal does duplicate pixel for pixel except the luminosity. That's Addy asking. So, or you could clone if you wanted to sort of clone a piece from here to here, you could do that as well. But to be honest, if we look at this at normal viewing size, we'd never notice that we'd done a bit of spot removal there. So I think that's probably where I would leave that one, to be honest. Let's do an image and let's say a new variant and look at those two together. So you see, let's hide the tools, Command T. Let's just turn off Proof View for a minute. So that's the final one. That's how we started, for example. If we zoom both to screen, then you can see the difference in the spot removal. Let's zoom both out and you can see likewise. So not a huge amount of changes, but you know, makes smaller incremental changes make a pretty good difference. So that was 15 minutes in total, but obviously if I wasn't talking, we could knock that out much quicker, of course. Is purple fringing the same as chromatic aberration? Tarek was asking. No, it's different. I mean, purple fringing is normally pops up if you've got like a backlit subject, very much lens dependent. Backlit, sort of very bright subject, you can see purple fringing pop up. To be honest, it's something I very rarely see on the Sony lenses. I mean, I have a Sony camera. It's very rare I see it on Phase 1 stuff, of course. But it's also very rare I see it on Sony stuff. So it's also a product of lens design as well. Okay, let's see the next shot. So this is straight out of camera. This is shot on a Phase 1, I think. This is a IQ3 80 megapixel, and that's what I ended up with yesterday when I was playing about. Again, very simple steps. So let's go through them. So first thing, let's just check this is straight. So we can use our straighten cursor tool at the top here. So R for straighten. So all you do is simply draw along your, whoops, helps if you actually manage to draw along your horizon or object that you know is horizontal or you want to be horizontal. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And then let go, and then Capture One will rotate around that point basically. So just a simple way to rotate your images. Next, if we look at exposure, see we're probably a little bit down if we look at the levels, so it's all kind of bunched up midtones to shadows, so we could probably lift that a little bit again. If we feel we've gone too far, then let's just have a check the face. Can always turn on our exposure warnings if we're worried about blowing it out, and we have lost a little bit or getting close to losing it on that channel, so let's just pull that back with the highlight recovery slider and maybe just drop exposure a bit too. So that way we know we've got all our channels nicely covered. Don't forget to always have a quick look at your levels tool. I mean, we might risk, if we dragged our highlights in, we might begin to risk blowing those highlights out again, so we've got to be a little bit careful with that. So probably only a couple of points in. And with the shadows, we probably don't want to bring that in because we're going to start clipping the clothing as well. But mid-tone wise, if we want to darken our mid-tones a little, I think I might, just to make it a bit richer, like so. So I can probably comfortably turn off exposure warnings now. It's just nice to have that when we're first playing around with levels and high dynamic range and exposure and so on. So that's a better exposure point now. So what's next? What's next? Do I want to darken those midtones? Sometimes it's a bit of back and forth. Actually, we won't darken those midtones too much, I think, because then we lose a bit too much detail in the clothing. If we did want more detail in the clothing, we could just lift up shadows, and it does quite a nice job of doing that. But I actually think it looks better like this. So that's pretty good start point. Now if we look at her skin tone, as usual, like anybody, has got some variation in their skin tone. So you see it's slightly different tone here, nice rich tone on the neck and shoulders, varies a bit over here, varies a little bit on the head as well. So we can use a really super good feature in the color editor specifically for adjusting skin. So the skin tone tab really is just for that, just for skin. We can use it for other things, but I won't go into that right now, but it really is targeted just for skin. Now it's best if we use this as a local adjustment. Now if you're very new to Capture One and you haven't used local adjustments before, I would strongly advise watching, was it last week's? No, the week before last webinar on local adjustments. So just to get all the basic grounding and so on, because that will help you a lot in Capture One. But I'm just going to do a quick local adjustment on her face. So if we go to our local adjustments tool tab, I'll make a new layer, much like Photoshop, called face. We're going to grab a brush, which is too big, so let's go a bit smaller. Let's right click to get that panel up. Full opacity, and let's do this. My mask is not the default color. I just find this a bit easier to see. And again, you can change the mask color in Capture One's preferences if you wish. So I'm just going to roughly go around the edge of her skin. If you wanted to, you could spend a bit more time, but it's probably not critical. So let's just fill in around there. Now to save a bit of time, we can just say fill mask, and that will fill the middle in like so. But I want to actually take out her eyes and her lips because I don't want that to be edited. So if, I don't want that to be affected by my color skin tone correction that we're going to do. So E on the keyboard to get erase. Let's just make that a bit smaller, and let's just take out her eye. I might make this a bit softer like so. So we'll just make sure we don't mess up any eyeshadow or anything like this. And same for this eye as well. Again, you might spend a bit more time doing this, but we don't have to be super critical. And finally, lips as well, like so. Let's just do that. And then what I'll do is I'll just take the brush again and then fill this in. If you're doing this with a mouse, it's quite difficult. I would say it's much easier doing this kind of stuff if you have a graphics tablet like a whack on, for example. Okay, so there's my mask. Let's just fit to screen, go a bit smaller. So if we press M on the keyboard, you can see the lovely mask that we've made in this case. Looks great, doesn't it? Very scary. And what we're going to do now is go to the color editor and the skin tone tab, grab our picker like we did before, and then we're going to look at our subject and think, okay, where is the nice skin tone? Where's the skin tone that I want to have over the entire subject? So let's pick, I'm going to go somewhere around there. Now remember, we're in a mask, so the only thing we're going to affect is in that masked area. So Tim, regarding to your earlier question, what I want to do is actually expand out this range as much as possible with the view to try and think about all the different skin tones that we want to fix. So everything on our current subject. Now you'll see in the skin tone part of the color editor, we've got these 3 sliders, uniformity sliders. So as I drag these to the right hand side, what happens is that everything in that selection gets transformed to my picked point, so the desirable skin tone. So if we drag hue all the way to the right, then that will level off the hues nicely. Saturation will do the same thing, so everything follows the same saturation. If you want some kind of natural blend, you can back those off a bit, and lightness will basically even out the lighting, so Instagram filter style. So obviously treat that with a little bit of care. So if we turn this layer off, let's just go down a bit so you can see. So if we turn this layer off, so that's before, like so, and then after. So it just does a nice subtle evening out of the skin tone colors and so on. We could, if we wanted to, we could include the hands as well, we could include the feet and so on, or we could do that on another layer as well. So what else we got to do? Let's do what we did previously. Let's just fix some spots. So let's go to 100%. Oops. If we do a right click, then you can get a mini navigator up, like so, which helps you to navigate around. Let's grab our spot removal tool, and then just pick out any spots that we need to or would wish to get rid of. Really not that many, to be honest. Remember, if you need to make this bigger, you can just grab the edge, which makes your spot bigger, and then we can just tap over like so and just take out any of the stuff that we don't want. So it's relatively quick. Just so you know, you are limited to a total of 100 spots, or 99 to be more accurate. So if you need more than 99, then it's a job for Photoshop, of course. So, and probably like all these little funny hairs that we have on the sweater and that kind of stuff, like these things, it's probably faster to do a quick sweep in Photoshop than doing stuff in Capture One. So, but for simple things like this, the spot tool works really nicely. Again, if you want to go a bit further, we don't have necessarily time today to do all the finite steps, but if you check out a webinar from Michael Wolowozniak, probably about 4 weeks back now, he does a really good demo of dodging and burning as well. So if you wanted to clean up, you know, some of the variation in tones, he does a really good example of that. So if we go back to our select tool, let's do an option click on the spot removal. So you see that was before and after. So just a nice cleanup like so. Now I think if we look down here, see we've got some other marks on the floor. So let's get rid of those as well. We could probably handle this with the spot tool. Just need to make it bigger. Like so. So if we want to pick out a few other distracting bits and pieces, then pretty simple to do so. Even this out of focus stuff in the background. Now I think, if from memory serves me right, there's a coloured splodge over here, which we don't want to put a huge spot on there. I don't think that's going to work, because that's the maximum size that we can do. Let's get rid of that one. So again, like we did before, we can use our heal layer. So click and hold, new heal layer, call this spot on the floor. Incorrectly spot on the floor. Let's right click, make our brush a bit bigger. Option click to pick our source, so let's go here. I'd say probably somewhere around there. And then let's just brush in like so. And then once we've hidden it, looks pretty big. Actually, I've gone a bit too, let's take the erase brush. I just got rid of some of her clothing there, which we don't want. So if I make that brush a bit smaller, and let's just go in a bit more detail there, then we'll probably be okay. There we go. So we got rid of that colored splodge as well. So let's fit back to screen. Let's just, that's a spot on my monitor. There's a spot there, but it was actually on my monitor. So how are we doing? Let's just check lens corrections and see what the light fall off is doing, because I don't think this is a shot where we want any vignetting. So let's just fix our light fall off in lens corrections as well. Sharpening wise, we're probably fine on the default, I would think. Plenty sharp enough. In anything, I might just go back a tiny bit like so. And finally, if we go to our color balance tool, great for just putting a color tone on your images. So let's just slightly cool shadows, slightly warmer mid-tones. If we need more accuracy, we can go to our mid-tone spot here and do so. Probably just a very subtle little color grade like so. And I think that probably fixes that up quite nicely. Alan says, what's light fall off? Well, no lens is perfect, regardless of manufacturer or whatever. So lens corrections can always mathematically improve on a lens, but they can't make a bad lens good. Always worth pointing out. So depending on the aperture we've shot at, what did we shoot this at? Show viewer labels, this was shot at f8, so it's probably a little bit of light fall off. So that's just to the edges. So obviously if you shoot wide open, then you're going to have more light fall off. So by knowing the aperture, then we can correct for various lens errors as such, like that. So that just means that light fall off towards the edges is just corrected nicely like so. This is a 150mm lens, so I doubt there's really any distortion worth worrying about, to be honest. That's why it's at 0 by default. So there's really no benefit to changing the distortion. Sharpness fall off, well, there's probably no point in doing much with that as well, and there's relatively 0 sharpness fall off on this lens as well. But light fall off kind of makes sense to do that. Okay, let's grab the image itself. Oh, 1 second. Let's get our browser back up. Let's make a new variant. So that's just how it came out of camera. Let's put them side by side. Command B to hide the tools. Command B to hide the browser. Let's zoom in to 100%. And then you can see that's how it came out of camera, and that's our quick fix in Capture One. So we've actually come quite a long way. If you see, the skin looks much better in color tone, got rid of some of the spots and so on. But for the bigger job of cleanup, like if we wanted to clean up our woolly sweater, then it makes more sense to do that and faster to do that in Photoshop. But a lot of the donkey work we've done already, and good color correction as well in Capture One too. Okay, let's hide the browser. Let's get the browser back, get the tools back. Could we use heel correction for hair? You could do, Marco, but remember you're limited to 16 layers. So if you need to do a lot of corrections, then it might be better to do it in Photoshop. Remember, Capture One's not a Photoshop replacement, but those heel layers are really good for quick fixes like you saw, you know, down on the floor and the other stuff we did before. But for a full-on retouch, then it's going to make more sense to go ahead and do that in Photoshop. Alrighty, let's do another one. So what should we do next? We've done a couple of people, so let's go penguin for a second. So here it is straight out of camera. So this was shot by Drew, who works with us, who you may well know, I think on a IQ100. So really nice shot out of camera. Let's just check our penguin buddy out. He's nice and sharp. Let's get rid of the browser for a second. But it's a little bit flat overall. I think this is Drew's interpretation after a few adjustments. Now what Drew tends to do, and this is something you can explore, and this is one of the reasons why I picked this image, is if you look in the base characteristics tool, this first of all describes the camera and the color profile for that camera, which is picked automatically. So, excuse me, phase 1 IQ3 100, but we have this curve here as well, you can see. Now by default this will be on auto, like so. And this curve basically gives you a good start point of contrast for your images. It's worth noting that the image coming straight out of camera, the raw file is really flat. So any manufacturer, any raw converter, with a manufacturer, when you're shooting it in camera JPEG, they apply some kind of contrast curve and adjustments to that, as we do in Capture One and as does every other manufacturer as well. Now if you want to just bypass all that and go straight to the almost out of camera flat look, then you can do so as well. But it does mean you have to do a bit more work in Capture One, but potentially you can extract more detail. Okay, so by choosing linear response, let's see auto, you see it's much brighter. If we look at our penguin tummy for a second and then go to linear response, then you see all the raindrops and all the feathers and all that kind of stuff. On auto, see it's starting to blow out, but on linear response, I know it's there and so on. I mean, even on auto, we could go straight to highlights and then pull that back, as you can see. But at least what you get with the linear response is you really know exactly all the kind of good stuff that's in the file, but you might just have to work a bit harder to get all the information out of that. Okay. So how are we going to start? Well, first of all, let's straighten up again. So let's just grab my straighten tool. I'm guessing that's probably straight, so that can just rotate around there quite nicely. And then the next thing that I would probably want to do with this shot is crop, because we've got a walrus in the corner here. He's a bit distracting, so we don't really want to have him popping up. So let's just grab the corner of the crop tool and and pull this around something like that. Let's put him almost in the middle, like so. Actually, I might crop even more. We've got 100 megapixels to play with, so let's just be bold with it. Too much. Let's go with something like, he's the star of the show, so let's go with something like that. Okay. So now we got good crop, we're straight, but it's still a bit flat. So what can we do? Well, instead of using the traditional sliders, we could grab contrast, which does a pretty nice job as well. Let's have a look at our curves and see what we can do here. Now we have two different types, RGB and Luma. Really good to see what both of these do and how differently they work as well. So first of all, if we pull an RGB curve, let's do so. And I'm borrowing heavily from sort of Drew's inspiration as well. Drawing a simple S-curve gives us more contrast, but it also gives a bit of a boost in the colors as well. So you see the saturation pops up a little bit, which is good because the linear response gives us relatively flat colors too. So I think that's enough contrast and enough color boost. And if I want to do anything else, like play around with the tones a bit more, I would then switch to the Luma curve, which won't affect my colors or saturation. So if I felt, you know what, let's just have a little bit more contrast perhaps, then I would probably then switch to Luma. But there's nothing wrong with having a combination of the two. Remember, if you change the RGB curve, you're going to affect the colors as well. If you change Luma curve, it's contrast only. So if we just reset this, and then I grab Luma and just throw in a contrast curve, see our colors are still a little bit flat. But if we go to RGB and then throw in our contrast curve, then we get a nice little helpful boost to those colors as well. And if I need to do anything else, then we can just play around with Luma as well. Okay, Gerhard says, I have always 3 points in the curve. How can I reduce this? You may have set a new default. You probably saved as a default. So just check that. You can always reset the defaults. That's probably why. You can have multiple points, 10 points if you wanted, 3 points, and so on. Now by doing that, don't panic. You see we've got the face is a bit dark, and maybe we've just potentially this is a bit too bright for some. But we'll worry about that in a minute because we have lost his face a little bit. Let's do that last. Now if we look at the sky, let's just go to our exposure and just drag that exposure down. See there's quite a lot of nice stuff in the sky going on. So let's extract that with a local adjustment. So we can grab our gradient tool, gradient mask rather. Where we start drawing the mask will be the strongest. Where we finish it will have faded to 0. So let's do something like that, like so. So now I can drop my exposure down, so it's more dramatic. We can have a nice heap of clarity, which is really good for sort of separating out clouds. Contrast doesn't work so well, just tends to sort of be a bit too much because contrast is going to affect your shadows and highlights, whereas clarity is more of a mid-tone adjustment, so it works a little better as well. So let's darken them up. So if we turn that layer on and off, you can see the difference, like so. Dionysus says, would it be better to drop the Luma curve instead of exposure? Let's try it. Let's go Luma and then drop that down. Thing is, if we do that, we're only doing the midtones, like so. So we could play around like that. Whoa, that's a good curve, isn't it? We could play around like that, but I think personally for this kind of stuff, if we drop the exposure, then we darken everything, and then we can get our clarity to improve on that. And if we've got too much going on, a bit too dark in the shadows, we could just lift that a little bit. Now this kind of moss on the wall is a bit flat, so I'm just wondering if we up saturation, we could get a little bit more color in that as well, but I might lighten that as well, just that area a bit later. Now if we pull highlights across, then we can actually get a bit more in those clouds as well. So maybe if I lift exposure and have highlights, we can play around as well, like so. But you see the gradient tool, maybe it's darkened this area a bit too much, but if I take my erase mask and right click and make this big, whoops, not that big, big and soft, and with a lower opacity and a lower flow, so the flow allows me to build up or reduce a mask in much slower, more gradual steps. So what I could do is then just get rid of a bit of that gradient mask there, just so it doesn't darken that down too much. So if we look at our mask now, whoops, press M to get the mask up, and you see I can just get rid of a little bit there, which means we're not darkening down that area so much. So the gradient mask, you know, you can always edit as well. Okay, while we're in local adjustments, let's fix our penguin face, like so. So let's make a new layer, call this penguin face. Now I want to brighten this up a little bit, but by how much, I don't know. So what we do is we can do a clever trick. Let's make that smaller. We can do a clever trick and visualize what our adjustments are going to do. You see, if I start dragging stuff now, nothing happens because I don't have a mask on the image. But if I straight away and say invert mask, then that will put the mask over the whole shot, as you can see. So now if I drag and Dionysus, this is, you know, a good tip for you to see what the different tools do. We want to brighten up his face. So what happens if I do exposure? Okay, it does that, kind of brightens the beak a bit as well. Would it be better to do shadows only? Maybe. Potentially. Or would it be better to do a Luma curve? Not so much. So I think what I would do, let's have a slight exposure bump and then a shadow bump as well, like so. But now we only want it to affect this area, so let's invert it back, but we've got our settings correct. So now we can take our brush. I would probably still have a low flow so I can build it up gradually, and then we can just brush in that lightening adjustment like so. So if we turn that layer off, then we can see what it's doing. If we need to delete any areas, we can just say erase and just fix any overspill that we might have done, for example. So that invert method is really good to visualize something that you're gonna brush in like so. So if we turn that off, so it's just lifted the face a little bit quite nicely. Now tummy wise, are we good with that? Let's see. So let's make a new layer, say penguin tummy, like so. And do the same thing, let's say invert mask. So that's a mask over the whole image. If I drag the highlight slider, we could just pull that back a little bit, like so. So now if I invert mask once more, then with a big brush, we could just brush this in, maybe not that big, something like that. We could just brush this in where we wanted to just pull up a bit more of those highlights. If we want it to happen faster, we can increase our flow like so. So if we turn that off, it's probably very subtle, before and after. It's just brought a little bit back like so. Let's see all of that detail, why not? If we turn face off, you can see what it's doing. If we turn tummy off, you can see what it's doing as well. That's probably about it. Now sharpening wise, I think relatively open aperture, f5.6, and you can see all this great detail, but there's no point sharpening the background because it's not in focus. So, but really our sharpening is probably fine, to be fair, but the only thing I might do is add a bit of structure, which is great for enhancing fine detail, and we do that over the whole image. It's not really affecting any noise, for example. So there's our final adjustment. Let's have a bit of vignetting maybe, like so, and just maybe a bit more like so. So that's how Drew did it. Looks quite different to what I ended up with. Two different adjustments. It's really hard to get exactly the same look from two different people. And actual fact, even when I process the same image over and over again, it always comes out a little bit different. So let's see how it looked out of camera. Let's say image, new variant as such. So that's that, and that's that. So that's how it came out of camera and how the adjustment is. Maybe I did go a bit dark, who knows? But we can always just lift up the background a bit, and then we're good as such. Okay, next one. How much time have we got? We can probably squeeze the last two in. I'm going to pick this one because this is a really old shot, and you can see what I ended up with yesterday. And this is a good lesson, especially if you've got older images in Capture One. This was last processed in Capture One 7, so a long time ago. So this is how it came out of camera. It's the USS Kittiwake in the Cayman Islands, which I was lucky enough to go to quite a long time ago. Should stress it's not my image, it was by someone else that was on the group itself. Now I'm no underwater expert, but of course when you're shooting underwater, the normal rules of white balance and all that kind of stuff don't apply. So we end up with quite sort of wacky shifted colors, and you can see by the histogram how all the channels are split up and everything. But where's my white balance tool gone? Oh, over here. White balance. But we know that the hull of the ship probably was a pretty good battleship grey. So I can take my white balance tool and just white balance off that, and straight away it's already looking a lot closer color wise. But it's pretty hazy, so if we look at our levels tool, can we do anything to help with that? Yes, we could drag in our shadow point, and we could drag in our highlight point, for example. And all we've done is white balance and levels, and we've come a long way already. So often, you don't really need to do a great deal. We could stop right there. Now this is a Panasonic Gf1, which is actually a camera I still have as well. Great camera, works really nicely, but it can be a little bit on the noisy side, older sensor technology and everything. And if we start to try and sharpen, like if we want to sharpen up the details a bit, let's just sort of increase sharpening, then we run the risk of also increasing the noise as well. So what we could actually do is treat this exercise by using local sharpening. Like there's no point sharpening over here, there's no point sharpening up here where it's kind of not super sharp anyway, because all we're going to do is accentuate noise. But it might make sense to sharpen a bit more around here and down on the hull and all that kind of stuff. So what we should do is kill all the sharpening, like so. So we're not sharpening anywhere, because then we're not accentuating our noise as such as well. And then what we can do is make ourselves a sharpening brush. So if we go to an area where we think we could help it with a bit of sharpening, let's go over here and make a new layer and call this sharpen layer. Do the same thing again, so we want to visualize the sharpening. So let's say invert mask. Remember, that gives us a mask over the whole image. And then grab our sharpening and then increase it until it's looking a little bit better. We could also have some structure in there maybe as well. So if we turn that layer off, so that's we're sharpening on, let's turn it off, especially sort of down here. Let's go to 200%. Let's turn our sharpen layer on. So see, it's sharpened up the whole details nicely, but the C is starting to get noisy. So that's not ideal. But it's doing a nice job of the hull and the rust and all that kind of stuff. So that's a pretty good amount and a bit of structure as well. So let's invert that back. So now we're fuzzy all over as such. So if we just go down to fit screen and let's take our brush. So now we've made ourselves a sharpening brush. So let's make it not quite so soft, and then now we can just draw this. I'm probably going to have full opacity for sure, and relatively big flow, because I think we can trust that we've done a nice job. And then we can just brush on the areas that we know we want to sharpen, which is kind of the foreground, the bit that was in focus. Don't know if we benefit from sharpening there, probably not actually. But all this stuff is gonna sharpen up quite nicely as such. So now we've really only sharpened those key areas as such, and now our C has stayed nice and noise free, so we can't really see any noise in that, but we've got a nice sort of sharp hull in the front as such. A good question from Addy, which makes sense to answer right now. So the rundown of sharpening, clarity, structure. So clarity is a contrast adjustment. Let's just fit screen 1 second, or like so. So clarity is a contrast adjustment, probably which we did on the background. No, we didn't do on the background layer. So let's put some on the background layer. So it's a contrast adjustment, but it only affects the mid-tone. So it does less to the shadows and highlights. So if we grab contrast, for example, like so, so you can see what the contrast is doing to the shadows and the highlights in the sea. Now there is a fair bit of intelligence built into the contrast slider, so it tries to prevent that happening as much as possible. But if you want just mid-tone contrast, then clarity slider is your friend, and we can push it much harder, and it kind of dehazes a little bit as well and does a nice mid-tone contrast. Structure is really good for bringing out anything with fine details, like penguin feathers, for example. So it helps to define edges and fine detail. Sharpening is just, you know, standard overall sharpening of the whole image, but it didn't make sense to sharpen all of this image because it's an older camera, has much higher noise as such. So what we can do is just do that on a sharpen layer, so we can just bring out the nice bits without making the seal noisy and so on. Troy said, what's the difference between fill mask and invert mask? Well, fill mask just fills in a hole. So if you were drawing round an object, like we wanted to mask the boat, ship, sorry, I should say, and grab our brush, and then let's say we wanted to mask the whole boat, then what we would do is you would go la 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 la, like so, and then we would say fill mask. So it's just a time saver. Invert mask gives you the inverse, like so, which is very useful for other stuff too. And then if we said fill, it would fill in the middle. But we don't need a mask for the boat in this occasion, so we can get rid of that. You can see that's my sharpen layer. So that's where we ended up sharpening, basically. Like so. We could probably, best practice would be to have slightly softer edges, I would think. So are we done? We digressed a bit. We got structure on the background. We got lots of clarity. I think in this case, vignetting would be nice, just to frame it a bit. Maybe the hull is a bit on the black side, so do we now need to just lift up the shadow a tiny bit, perhaps? And I think there's some nice rust on the top there. That's boat people, that's the bow or the stern? Bow, I guess. Color editor. Let's go to advanced, get the picker, just pick the tone here, and then I want to saturate that up a bit more so it just pops out at us like so. So I think that's probably it. Let's just, I don't know if the crop can be improved at all. Do we want that diver in? Maybe. Let's not cut that diver's legs off like so. So there's our finished shot like so. Now if we remember what it looked like, let's say new variant. Oh, it's even the wrong way around. And let's bring up how. So really different, to be honest. I mean, that just by fixing white balance and levels, we went a long way. And probably I would guess if you did auto white balance, oops, wrong one. If we did auto white balance, oh, I don't want to do it on both. Hang on, let's just turn this off. Auto white balance and auto levels. How far would we get? Not that far, actually. I think this one, because it's so wacky with its white balance, this is where we need the picker. And then if we said auto levels again, now we actually get quite a long way with only using two tools to how it was before. Then all the other stuff is just improvement. If we zoom into, let's go to 100% to fit both of those, and then you can see that our sharpening has done quite a nice job of just popping out those extra details a bit. If we go to 200 and then look at the C like so, then we've got, you know, a little bit of additional sharpness and help, but we haven't, you know, really increased our noise to make it look ugly as such. And if we wanted to, what we could do is we can do noise reduction as a local adjustment too. So we could always brush on more noise reduction if we wanted to in different places as well. But I think even with your really old images, say Gf1, I can't even remember when that camera came out. I must have bought that 7 years ago or something like that. But even with old cameras and improvements in raw converters and so on, you can do nice stuff with old images that you might not have been able to before. Because as I said, when I looked at this yesterday, it was processed in Capture One 7, and I didn't get really anything close to what we have today. John says, when you have two images on screen 1:1, does pan, zoom, sync for both images? If you do a trick, so if we have two images on screen, if I hold my shift key down and click the big head up here, then they both zoom. If I keep holding the shift key down, then they both go. So it's a shift click. So if I shift click fit and 100% and like so, then it does. Could I have used sharpening threshold to prevent it from sharpening the C? James says, yeah, that's actually not a bad tactic as well. If we bump the threshold up, then we could probably prevent it from sharpening the C, but it might have done the same with a few other bits as well. So I think making a sharpening brush, then you're the guy who's, or girl, who's in control of where the sharpening goes as such. So you can place it exactly where you want to put it. So it's a, I guess it's a control freak thing as well. Addy, that was the same question as John. So yeah, hold your shift key down to double pan. Okay. And to get images to appear side by side, that's down to this icon up here. So this one. So if multi-view is on, then we see all images that are selected in the browser. So if I were to select one and then command click, so with the Apple key, or if you're on PC, that would be your Alt key, I think. So if I just keep selecting images, let's turn off proof, then it lays them up like so. If I held my shift key down, then it would pan them all at the same time, as you can see. But if I have the single view only, like so, then it only will show the primary one, like so. Multi-view shows everything. So it's really good for comparing stuff. How are we doing for time? We could squeeze, we could do the last one. What is the last one really fast? Okay, yeah, this was a black and white conversion test and to black out the background. So it's pretty easy. He says that. So black and white, let's turn on black and white using the black and white tool, not by desaturating, like so. Oh, should we check exposure and levels? Let's auto levels. Let's make our midtones a bit darker. I think bring the exposure down a bit and the highlights down a bit. If we go to black and white, now we can just play around with the various tones to just darken those off. I'm not looking at the background because we're going to kill that in another way. We could put the green right down like so. So now let's hide the browser. Let's get my proofing view back on. Crop tool. Let's just crop this a bit more interestingly, like so. And we want to black out the background. So look, we could do a couple of things. We could do a vignette. Probably easiest thing to do with a local adjustment. Make a new layer. Let's call this blackout. I'm going to invert it and then basically just use exposure to kill to that point. And I can say invert mask back, take a brush and probably relatively soft, and then I can just brush this on and give myself my blacked out background. You would spend a bit more time doing it, of course, if you have more than a minute to go. But even if we're a bit sloppy, we can do that. Then I would take a raised brush, not quite so soft, and then we could just fix our errors like so. If you want to try this yourself, this was actually an image shot by Martin Bailey for one of our adjustment guides on our YouTube channel. So when you get the follow-up email, check out the YouTube channel and you'll see a section called Simple Adjustment Guides, and you can download raw files and watch how the photographers adjusted it and then try it yourself as well. And again with this one, it probably doesn't make sense to sharpen everything because it's macro shot, limited depth of field. So we could make our sharpen layer once more. On the background, we would just put sharpening to 0 because maybe we don't want to sharpen the out of focus areas. On the sharpen layer, we would put the sharpening to what we wanted. We could invert it first so we could see what that was doing. So if we could boost up our sharpening. So that's sharpening up the flower people, stamen, I guess, in the center. Now I can invert that back, grab a brush, probably a nice soft one, and then we can just brush on where we want to have sharpening on the image, which is really only in the center, like so. Don't know if there's anywhere else that's in focus. Not really. So it's mostly the center and that little tiny flower there. So that gives us our sharpening layer, which prevents sharpening happening anywhere else in the image. There we go. That was a ultra speedy one, like so, but you get the idea. Crops a bit off, but I'm sure you get that. Okay, last few questions. Is it worth auto masking? Nah, I don't think so, because I think if you auto masked around that, let's turn black out. It kind of looks too good, you know. But you could try. It's very, very rarely I use auto mask. I think it'd be much faster to do that without that. And I don't mind the little creep of the shadow on certain areas. Yes, I'd spend a bit more time doing it, but I don't think auto mask would necessarily be a better choice. When do you use brightness and exposure sliders? Exposure, that's the closest thing to changing the exposure in camera at time of shooting. So if your image is under or overexposed, use the exposure slider. Brightness raises the midtones. It's pretty much the same as doing this. So that's what the brightness slider is doing, raising or lowering the midtones. So if your midtones need brightening, use the brightness slider. Any film simulations? Not built into Capture One, but there is a third-party company that makes film simulations, CaptureOneStyles.com. So nothing to do with Phase One, but Alex, who's made all of those film emulations, seem to work pretty well. It's not free, it's something you have to buy, but it is available. Okay, last question from Robert, does the local adjustment layer have some kind of a pasty slider? No, it doesn't. I agree it would be nice, but the sort of workaround for that is, of course, let's say once we've done our adjustment, by changing the underlying adjustment, then that's pretty much the same as the opacity as such. Or you can go over with an erase brush, say set to 50% or whatever, and then you can change your opacity like so, for example. So there's no opacity slider, but changing the adjustment or changing the mask by deleting part of it or adding to it is another way around it too as well. Okie dokie. So how are we doing for time? That does bring us up to the end. As usual, at the end of the webinar, I tell you what's coming next week. But there isn't one next week as I'm away for a couple of weeks in the USA. But we will return, I think it is, the next webinar's around May the 11th, something like that. That will be the next scheduled one. So you can always check our events page to see what's coming, or you can sign up to the Phase 1 newsletter to see what's coming as well. That's a good way to keep in touch. So if you don't get our newsletters, sign up, and that way you'll know when you can sign up for the next one as well. But May 11th, stick that in your diary, keep that day free. That's when the next webinar will be. Okay, many thanks for your time. Hope that was useful. It's a kind of hodgepodge of various different techniques and so on, but it's good to see a whole bunch of stuff strung together rather than just one singular technique as such. Alrighty, many thanks for your time, and I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye now.